What's going on, everybody, and welcome to what is this, episode 90 of the Book Binge, where this week we're doing a little bit of a different review just in the form of what it is that we're actually covering. I don't expect this video to get, very much following or success or views at all. Like, I expect it to get pretty much no retention or anything like that, and that's fine. As I discussed in this Thursday's video, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, I do review just about every book I read, regardless of what I think the reception will be. And besides, this book is one that I love, so let's just start talking about it. I'm going to introduce the book out as The Cardturner by Louis Sachar, who is the author of Holes, which is a very, very, very good children's book. I did actually do a review of that one. I want to say at this point, probably a little over a year ago now, I think. But it was probably only like a 7-minute video or something, not a review that I think is necessary watching. And of course, anybody watching this channel, well, anybody who's an avid reader in general has probably already read or at least watched Holes. And since that adaptation is pretty much identical to the movie anyway, it's not like it really makes much difference. But with that being said, I first read this book over a spring break in April several years ago. I want to say I was in 6th grade. It was actually the same year that I believe I read Holes for the first time, because I had brought Holes to read over spring break. My older brother had brought a copy of this to read over the week, and once we had each finished our book, we kind of swapped and read the other, and I fell in love with The Cardturner for sure. It's one that I've read many times. I read it pretty much every year from 6th grade, I want to say, until junior year. I think I actually started it in senior year for another reread, but then didn't finish it. I was just kind of in a funk at that point in time in my life. Like, mentally, I was really struggling to get through school for that last year, but that's all information that we don't need to go to with the review. So let me go ahead and start off this review now with The Good of the Cardturner by Louis Sachar. First things first, it's very short, it's very addictive, it's a very quick read. It is not difficult in the slightest. Every time I start reading this book, I just cannot stop reading it. I always this year especially is like a really good example of this. I started reading the book around the same time that I started reading another book as well. I was reading two books simultaneously, both short, quick, and easy reads, by all accounts. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to read some of the Cardturner in the morning, and I'll read the other book, the rest of the day or at work or whatever it is, whenever it is that I find time to read a little bit of extra stuff. And then it just kind of turned out happening that I just finished the book in 2 days and didn't read the other book much at all beyond that, beyond a couple chapters at first, because I was like, I just want to read more Cardturner. I need more of the Cardturner. It's just a really fun read for me. Like I said, it's very addictive. Once I start, I just can't stop it. The book is a bit YA, so I think most people, aren't going to be super interested in it, especially people who, at this point, I think are, going to be the predominant audience of my channel at this point. It is a bit more mature than Holes in some ways, just because it is targeted at high schoolers rather than, say, middle schoolers like Holes is. Holes is a little bit more appropriate for all ages, I think. It's really easy for anybody to read and enjoy, and the humor and stuff that's in it doesn't feel cheap or cheesy in a way that, say, people who don't enjoy typical YA stuff wouldn't enjoy. It's got that children's book quality to it that doesn't limit it to being a children's book, if that makes any sense. Cardturner's a little bit different. You can tell it's made for high schoolers, and people who aren't in high school probably aren't going to have, the most interest in it, and that's fine. But in terms of the subject matter, the things that the book is about, I think it is still an interesting read. In case you don't know, or in case you haven't, watched any of my past videos on the channel where I mention it, such as my April reading nostalgia video that I did a couple months back, my reading wrap up and TBR, stuff like that, for whatever month I read. So the April reading wrap up and May TBR. Cardturner is a book about the card game Bridge. Yes, of all things, of all games, it is about Bridge, which is a little bit of an interesting topic. And if you have any fleeting interest in the game itself, this book will satisfy the very foundation of that. I know when I started reading it, I didn't necessarily have an explicit interest in the game, but because of reading this book, I absolutely have an interest in actually learning the game. If you've never had an interest in bridge, on the other hand, you probably will have some form of interest in it after reading this book, whether you want to or not, let's say. Somehow the book is just written so well to, make the game interesting without getting too bogged down in details and whatnot. Sachar actually has an author's note at the very beginning of the book that's just a page long, just right there. And in this little note, he likens this book to, imagine being abducted by aliens and then just kind of like learning their language eventually and learning their culture and eventually becoming an author there. But you loved baseball back home, so you want to write a book about baseball. He likens writing a book about bridge in this, in the Cardturner, as to writing a book about baseball for aliens, so people who have no idea what the game is or how it's played or anything like that. Because especially in today's day and age, and particularly amongst younger generations like mine, I wonder if many of the kids from my graduating class even know what the card game bridge is, let alone any form of the basis of what it's about. All in all, it's kind of hard to tell you what the good of the book is without just saying that it's a joy to read, because it's not a horribly plot focused story. And I suppose this can kind of be the start of where I get into the bad of the Cardturner. Is that the plot isn't particularly intricate, it's not super advanced, it's not very crazy, it's not even like the most quote unquote interesting plot. I read the book just as much for the game and the random scenes of the actual game playing and stuff like that as I do for any form of plot. But the plot does do a couple things that I do think are interesting. There is one sort of quasi semi halfway twist that I obviously can't say because of spoilers and because it kind of just entirely shifts the scope of what the story is doing at that point in time. It still goes in the same approximate direction. It twists the importance of it, um, especially for the main character or two. Um, all that to say is that this twist keeps the story interesting and enjoyable without necessarily keeping the plot like anything that's, subpar, while also not being anything that's going to blow you out of the water. Certain character work in the Cardturner is somewhat shallow, I would say, but that was never really the focus of the story. I think, most of the book is focused on the card game and the way the card game is utilized throughout the plot of the book. And you also have to consider the fact that the book is a first person narration from a high schooler. I believe Alton, the main character, is 17 years old, I believe. So the fact that some of the characters seem shallow and whatnot actually isn't horribly out of place, because it could just be, the way that they are written by the supposed high school narrator, compared to, say, Holes, where Sachar's character work is really good for a 200-page, easily readable in one day children's book, right? Um, but the other thing that I would say is probably the roughest part of the book, like the one that sticks out the most to me, is that a couple of the scenes do feel a little out of place or strange reading them now, in sense of, what they were doing. Like there's one in particular that just feels very weird in a sort of YA way. It feels very weird in a YA way. That's just like, why was this written this way? It's kind of awkward, you know. And it was actually a scene that has always seemed weird to me. Like never once have I read the book without thinking that that scene was really weird and definitely should have been modified. Um, but otherwise, the book is just a joy for me to read. The ugly of the Cardturner is mostly in how it affects me in my day-to-day life. Every single time I read the book, I have a phase for, anywhere from several days to a few weeks, sometimes, where once I get finished reading it, I can't stop thinking about bridge. I can't stop thinking about the book. I just want to play bridge IRL. I want to join a bridge club, all this kind of stuff. It's a low-key, unhealthy obsession that I get every time I read the book. The recommendation of the Cardturner is one that I want to say I recommend to people to read, partially because it's such a short and quick read. I don't see why I shouldn't recommend it. But on the other hand, I can definitely see how it's a tough sell. Like I said, it's a book about bridge of all things. And even though it makes bridge interesting, I think it succeeds in doing that. If you have no interest in bridge, you're probably not going to have an interest in this book. Again, that's perfectly fine for the exact reasons that Sachar says in his author's note. It's a little bit of a tough sell, and I'm surprised that the book kind of got published in the first place because it's definitely an interesting concept. But I still recommend it just because I enjoy it so much. But if you're not interested, or if you don't care enough about bridge, or if you don't care enough to give the book a shot, again, like I said, still perfectly fine. I'm not going to hold it against anybody who doesn't want to read the book. But if you do have an interest in reading the book because I recommend it, I appreciate that. It is a favorite of mine, even if it's not necessarily a great book. Like it's just dumb fun is what it is for me. And that comes to the end of this review. I doubt this review is any form of success, especially since it's a book I recommend, but I don't think anybody watching this video is ever going to read it. But whatever. I tried my best and I still had fun. In fact, I actually think the review went a little bit better than I thought it was going to based off of how I had my notes written. So if this review worked for you, let me know in the comments so that I know that I did something somewhat successfully at least. But I do appreciate the support and you watching all the way through this video. If you did, I appreciate that. I'll be back on Thursday, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, with a video about why I review just about every single book I read. And then I'll be back again next week with another reading wrap up, and TBR, I believe, is on the schedule. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, you can go ahead, like the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what I have coming out. Appreciate the support. I'll be back in the next video.